A beautiful teen from a working-class family sneaks into a private country club. When she meets the owner's son, everything changes.
Hello and welcome to 80s Love Stories, where I, your favorite narrator, Christopher, bring you an exciting love story straight from the unforgettable 1980s. Get ready for a journey full of nostalgia and incredible twists. Today's story is truly remarkable, with an ending that's sure to touch your heart and leave you amazed. So, stay with me until the very last moment. I hope this experience is unforgettable for you, and may God bless you and your family. Now, let's get started. Bethany Thompson stared at the towering iron gates of Oakwood Country Club, her heart pounding against her ribs. The exclusive club stood as a symbol of everything she couldn't have: wealth, privilege, and acceptance into a world that seemed galaxies away from her modest life on the other side of town. She pulled at her borrowed dress, a hand-me-down from her older cousin that she'd carefully altered to look more current. The soft peach fabric complemented her sun-kissed skin, and she'd spent hours practicing walking in the second-hand heels she'd found at the local thrift store. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn as Bethany slipped through a gap in the hedges she'd discovered during one of her reconnaissance missions. She'd spent weeks observing the club's routines, watching the wealthy members come and go in their expensive cars, noting when security was most relaxed. This was her chance. The annual summer gala was in full swing, and the guard at the gate was distracted by a steady stream of arriving guests. Bethany smoothed her hair, took a deep breath, and walked with practiced confidence toward the clubhouse, mimicking the assured stride she'd observed in the club's regular patrons. The marble steps gleamed in the fading sunlight as she ascended, her heart threatening to burst from her chest. Laughter and music drifted through the open doors, a siren song pulling her into a world she'd only dreamed about. "Good evening, miss." A uniformed staff member greeted her at the entrance. Bethany smiled and nodded, praying he wouldn't ask to see an invitation. She'd timed her arrival perfectly, late enough that the initial rush had passed, but not so late that her entrance would draw attention. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the gathering. Women in designer dresses floated across the polished floor, while men in tailored suits clustered around the bar. The air was thick with expensive perfume and the kind of casual confidence that came from never having to worry about money. Bethany made her way to a quiet corner, grateful for the potted palm that provided a bit of cover. From here, she could observe everything she'd been curious about, the way these people moved, talked, and interacted. It was research, she told herself, though deep down she knew it was more than that. It was a glimpse into a life she desperately wanted, but could never have. "You're hiding," the voice startled her, and she turned to find a young man watching her with an amused expression. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that fell across his forehead in a way that suggested he spent good money to make it look carelessly perfect. "I'm not hiding," Bethany replied, lifting her chin. "I'm observing." He smiled, and something in her chest fluttered. "I'm Matthew. Matthew Oliver. And you are?" "Bethany Thompson." The words were out before she could think to give a false name. There was something about his direct gaze that made lying feel impossible. "Well, Bethany Thompson, I don't recognize you, and I know everyone who comes to these things." His tone was curious rather than accusatory, but Bethany felt her pulse quicken. "I'm new," she managed, gripping her borrowed clutch tighter. "My family just moved here." Matthew tilted his head, studying her with those intense eyes. "Really? Where from?" Before Bethany could fabricate an answer, a commotion near the entrance drew their attention. A security guard was speaking animatedly with the staff member who had greeted her earlier, and they were both scanning the room. I need to use the powder room," Bethany stammered, her carefully constructed confidence crumbling. She turned to flee, but Matthew caught her arm gently. "You weren't invited, were you?" he asked softly, his voice free of judgment. Bethany felt tears threatening to spill. "I'm sorry. I wanted to see what it was like. Just once." The security guard was moving through the crowd now, getting closer. Matthew's expression shifted from curiosity to determination. "Come with me," he said, offering his arm as if they were old friends. "Quickly." Bethany hesitated for a fraction of a second before taking his arm. Matthew led her confidently through the crowd, nodding to acquaintances as they passed. They slipped through a side door and into a hallway lined with black and white photographs of the club's history. "Where are we going?" Bethany whispered as they hurried down the corridor. "Say somewhere safe," Matthew replied, guiding her through another door and out onto a terrace that overlooked the golf course. The evening air was warm and heavy with the scent of blooming jasmine. In the distance, sprinklers created rainbow arcs in the setting sun. "Why are you helping me?" Bethany asked, still holding his arm, afraid to let go. Matthew turned to face her, and in the golden light, his expression was unreadable. "Because you're the most interesting person at this entire party." Before Bethany could respond, voices approached from inside. Matthew quickly led her down the terrace steps and into the gathering darkness of the golf course. They ran together, Bethany's borrowed heels sinking into the perfectly maintained grass, until they reached a small groundskeeper's shed partially hidden by ancient oak trees. "No one ever comes here at night," Matthew said, opening the door. The shed smelled of freshly cut grass and motor oil. Through its small window, they could see flashlight beams sweeping the grounds. "I should go," Bethany said, though everything in her wanted to stay. "I never meant to cause trouble." "You're not trouble," Matthew said quietly. "You're brave." Their eyes met in the dim light, and Bethany felt something shift in the air between them. This wasn't part of her plan. None of this was. She'd only wanted to observe, to pretend for one evening that she belonged in this world. Instead, she'd found something, someone she never expected. "Will you come back?" Matthew asked as the searchlights moved away from their hiding spot. "I can't," Bethany replied, though her heart argued otherwise. "This isn't my world." Matthew stepped closer, and Bethany's breath caught in her throat. Maybe it could be. The sound of voices calling Matthew's name broke the moment. He moved to the door and peered out. "It's clear now. You can slip out through the back gate near the maintenance road." Bethany nodded, gathering her courage to step back into her real life. As she reached the door, Matthew caught her hand. "I meant what I said. Come back tomorrow, after sunset. I'll be waiting here." Bethany knew she should say no, knew this could only end in heartbreak. But as she looked into Matthew's eyes, she found herself nodding. She slipped into the night, her borrowed dress damp with dew, her heart racing with more than just the thrill of escape. Behind her, the lights of Oakwood Country Club glowed like a fairy tale castle, and somewhere inside, a boy from a different world was already waiting for tomorrow's sunset. Bethany spent the next day in a haze, mechanically going through her shifts at both the diner and the local record store. Her fingers still tingled from where Matthew had held her hand, and every time the bell above the diner's door chimed, her heart jumped, half expecting to see him walking in. "Earth to Bethany." Sarah, her co-worker at the record store, waved a vinyl record in front of her face. "You've been alphabetizing the same section for 20 minutes. What's got into you?" Bethany blushed, quickly moving to another shelf. "Nothing, just tired." "Uh-huh," Sarah responded, unconvinced. "This wouldn't have anything to do with where you disappeared to last night, would it? Your mom called looking for you." Guilt twisted in Bethany's stomach. She'd told her mother she was working a late shift at the diner. It wasn't like her to lie, but lately, the weight of their financial struggles felt suffocating. Her father's factory job barely covered the bills, and her mother's seamstress work had slowed since the new mall opened on the other side of town. The record store's speakers crackled with the opening notes of a popular power ballad, and Bethany found herself humming along, her mind drifting back to Matthew. Was he thinking about her too, or had last night been nothing more than a rich boy's momentary amusement? As sunset approached, Bethany changed into a simple sundress, her own this time. She'd rather Matthew see her as she really was than pretend to be something she wasn't. Her mother was working late at her sewing table, taking in another wealthy woman's dress that no longer fit, so sneaking out was easier than expected. The walk to Oakwood Country Club took nearly an hour. By the time she reached the maintenance road, stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Her practical sneakers made it easier to navigate the uneven ground, but she carried her mother's old sandals in her bag, a small concession to appearing more put together. The groundskeeper's shed stood dark and silent. Bethany's heart sank. Of course he hadn't come. Why would he? But then a figure emerged from the shadows, and Matthew's smile lit up the gathering dusk. "You came," he said, sounding genuinely pleased. "You sound surprised." "I wasn't sure you would. Most girls I know wouldn't trek through a golf course in the dark to meet a stranger." "I'm not most girls, you know," Bethany replied, then immediately wished she could take back the words. They sounded too defensive, too obvious, but Matthew just nodded. "I noticed that last night. Come on, I want to show you something." He led her past the shed to a golf cart parked in the shadows. "Borrowed it from the maintenance guys," he explained, helping her in. "They won't miss it for a few hours." They drove quietly through the darkened course, the cart's electric motor humming softly. The manicured fairways stretched out like velvet ribbons under the stars, and the air was thick with the scent of freshly cut grass and night-blooming flowers. "Where are we going?" Bethany asked as they passed the 18th hole. "You'll see." They crested a small hill, and Bethany gasped. Below them, a small lake gleamed in the moonlight. A wooden dock extended into the water, and at its end, Matthew had set up what looked like an impromptu picnic. "I thought you might be hungry," he said, suddenly seeming uncertain. "The club's chef makes amazing chicken salad sandwiches." Bethany's throat tightened. No one had ever done anything like this for her before. "It's perfect," she managed. They sat on the dock, their feet dangling over the water. Matthew had thought of everything: sandwiches, fresh fruit, and even a small portable radio playing quietly in the background. The night air was warm, and fireflies danced along the shoreline. "So," Matthew said, passing her a sandwich, "tell me about yourself. The real story this time." Bethany hesitated. "There's not much to tell. I work 2 jobs, help my mum with her seamstress business when I can, and dream about going to college someday." She took a bite of the sandwich to avoid saying more. "What would you study?" "Photography," she answered without hesitation. "I love capturing moments, telling stories through images." She didn't mention that her camera was a beat-up Polaroid she'd bought at a yard sale, or that she could barely afford film. "Show me," Matthew said. "What?" He reached into the picnic basket and pulled out a camera. Not just any camera, but a professional-grade model that probably cost more than Bethany's family made in months. "I borrowed it from the club's photographer," Matthew explained. "Show me how you see the world." Bethany took the camera with trembling hands. Through the viewfinder, everything looked different. She captured Matthew in profile, his face illuminated by moonlight, the way the stars reflected on the lake's surface, the distant lights of the clubhouse twinkling like earthbound constellations. "These are amazing," Matthew said, looking at the digital display. "You have a real eye for composition." "It's easy with a camera like this," Bethany deflected, though pride warmed her chest. "No, it's not the camera. It's you." Matthew's voice was soft but certain. "You see beauty in things most people overlook." Their eyes met, and Bethany felt that same electric connection she'd experienced the night before. The radio played softly in the background, a new wave song about star-crossed lovers that seemed too perfect for the moment. "What about you?" she asked, breaking the tension. "What does Matthew Oliver dream about?" His expression clouded. "Honestly, sometimes I dream about being anyone but Matthew Oliver." "What do you mean?" He leaned back on his hands, looking up at the stars. "Everyone has my whole life planned out. Prep school, then Yale like my father, then joining the family business, the country club, and the right social circles, the right kind of wife." He trailed off, glancing at her before quickly looking away. "And that's not what you want." "I want to make my own choices, find my own path." He picked up a stone and skipped it across the water. "But in my world, that's not really an option." Bethany watched the ripples spread across the lake's surface. "At least you have options," she said quietly. "In my world, just dreaming about college feels like reaching for the stars." Matthew turned to face her fully. "Maybe that's why we found each other. We both know what it's like to feel trapped, just in different ways." The honesty in his voice made Bethany's heart ache. This wasn't supposed to happen. She wasn't supposed to find someone who understood her. Not here, not like this. A security golf cart's headlights swept across the far end of the course, and they both ducked instinctively. "We should go," Matthew said reluctantly. "They'll be doing their rounds soon." The drive back was quiet, both lost in thoughts of what this connection between them meant. At the maintenance road, Matthew helped her out of the cart, his hand lingering in hers. "Can I see you again?" he asked. Every sensible part of Bethany screamed that this was a bad idea, that she was setting herself up for heartbreak, that their worlds were too different, the obstacles too great. But looking into Matthew's eyes, she found herself saying, "Same time tomorrow." His smile was answer enough. As Bethany walked home under the summer stars, she knew she was stepping into dangerous territory. But for the first time in her life, she felt truly seen, truly understood. And maybe, just maybe, that was worth the risk. What she didn't know was that someone had seen them at the lake, someone who would make sure their secret meetings wouldn't stay secret for long. Pamela Oliver stood at the window of her private study in the country club, watching her son's golf cart disappear into the darkness for the third night in a row. The crystal tumbler in her hand caught the lamplight as she swirled its contents, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the glass in irritation. She'd seen everything at the lake, the picnic, the shared laughter, the way Matthew looked at that girl. It was exactly what she'd feared when she'd first spotted the intruder at the gala. Now her son, her only child, was sneaking around with some girl from the wrong side of town. "Charles," she called to her husband, who sat reading financial reports in his leather armchair, "we need to discuss Matthew." Meanwhile, Bethany hurried through her morning shift at the diner, her thoughts constantly drifting to her upcoming meeting with Matthew. They'd spent every evening together for the past few days, talking about everything and nothing, sharing dreams and fears under the summer stars. "Order up," Joe, the cook, called out, snapping Bethany back to reality. She grabbed the plates, nearly colliding with a well-dressed woman who'd appeared suddenly at the counter. "I'm so sorry," Bethany started, but the words died in her throat. The woman's perfectly coiffed hair and designer outfit screamed old money, but it was her eyes that made Bethany freeze. They were exactly like Matthew's. "Bethany Thompson, isn't it?" Pamela's voice was silk over steel. "Might we have a word?" Bethany glanced at her manager, who nodded, clearly impressed by their wealthy visitor. In a daze, she followed Pamela to a corner booth, her uniform suddenly feeling cheaper than ever. "I'll be direct," Pamela began, declining the menu Bethany offered. "I know about your encounters with my son." Bethany's hands twisted in her apron under the table. "Mrs. Oliver, Please, let me finish." Pamela's smile never reached her eyes. "I'm sure you're a lovely girl, and I understand the appeal of summer romance. But surely you realize this can't go anywhere. Matthew has responsibilities, expectations. His future is already mapped out." "We're just friends," Bethany managed, though the words tasted like ash. "Of course you are." Pamela's tone made it clear she didn't believe it for a second. "And as his friend, I'm sure you want what's best for him. Matthew is leaving for prep school soon. After that, Yale, then business school. He'll take his place in society, marry someone suitable, and continue the Oliver legacy." Each word was a carefully placed knife. Bethany sat very still, fighting back tears. "I'm prepared to be generous," Pamela continued, opening her designer handbag. "Your family's struggling, aren't they? Your mother takes in sewing. Your father works at that dreadful factory." She pulled out a checkbook. "Name your price." The fluorescent lights of the diner suddenly seemed too bright, too harsh. Bethany stood up so quickly her chair scraped against the floor. "I don't want your money, Mrs. Oliver," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "And I don't think Matthew wants the future you've planned for him either." Pamela's perfectly composed facade cracked slightly. "You don't know anything about my son, or what he wants. You're just a momentary distraction, a bit of summer rebellion. Do you really think he'd choose you over everything he's been raised for?" Before Bethany could respond, the diner's door chimed. Matthew walked in, stopping short at the tableau before him, his mother sitting regally in the cheap vinyl booth, Bethany standing with tears in her eyes. "Mom." His voice was sharp with disbelief. "Tighty, what are you doing here?" "Matthew, darling, I was just having a lovely chat with your friend." Pamela stood smoothly, but Matthew was already moving to Bethany's side. "What did you say to her?" he demanded, seeing Bethany's expression. "Only the truth, dear. Someone had to." The diner had gone quiet, other customers watching the drama unfold. Bethany's manager hovered uncertainly near the kitchen door. "I should get back to work," Bethany whispered, trying to step away, but Matthew caught her hand. "No," he said firmly, looking directly at his mother. "We're leaving, all of us. We need to talk, but not here." The drive to Oakwood was silent and tense. Bethany sat in the back of Pamela's luxury car, watching the familiar streets of her neighborhood give way to the manicured perfection of the country club district. Matthew kept glancing back at her in the rearview mirror, his jaw set in anger. They ended up in Matthew's father's study, where Charles Oliver waited, looking grave. Family portraits lined the walls, generations of Olivers in expensive clothes with practiced smiles. Bethany had never felt more out of place. "This has gone far enough," Charles began, but Matthew cut him off. "No, you don't get to decide that. You don't get to decide anything about this." "Matthew," Pamela interjected, "we're only thinking of your future." "My future?" Matthew laughed bitterly. "You mean the future you've planned out for me since birth? Yale, business school, marrying some society girl who cares more about country club memberships than actual people." "Those connections matter," Charles said firmly. "The Oliver name means something in this town." "Maybe I don't want to be an Oliver," Matthew exploded. "Maybe I want to be myself for once." The silence that followed was deafening. Bethany wished she could disappear into the expensive carpet. "This is exactly what we were afraid of," Pamela said quietly. "She's filling your head with these ridiculous notions." "Bethany hasn't filled my head with anything," Matthew interrupted. "Oh, she's the only person who's ever asked me what I want, instead of telling me what I should want." "And what exactly do you want?" Charles demanded. Matthew turned to look at Bethany, and in his eyes she saw everything they'd shared over the past few days, the laughter, the dreams, the understanding. But she also saw the weight of generations of expectations, of privilege and responsibility. "I want a chance to find out who I am," he said finally. "Not who you want me to be." "Then you leave us no choice," Charles said, his voice heavy. "Either you end this, whatever this is, focus on your future, and prepare for prep school, or what? Or you lose everything, your trust fund, your place at Yale, your position in the family business, everything." Bethany couldn't take it anymore. "Stop," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Please, just stop." All eyes turned to her. She took a deep breath, remembering everything her parents had taught her about dignity in difficult times. "Mrs. Oliver was right about one thing," she continued. "I don't belong in your world, but maybe that's not what matters. What matters is that Matthew deserves the chance to choose his own path, even if that path doesn't include me." She turned to Matthew, whose expression was a mix of pain and protest. "I won't be the reason you lose everything. I won't let you throw away your future because of a few magical summer nights." "Bethany, no!" But she was already moving toward the door, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. Behind her, she heard the beginning of another argument, but she didn't stop. She ran through the club's perfectly decorated halls, past the shocked looks of late-night members, out into the warm summer night. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs trembled, finally collapsing onto a bench in the small park near her neighborhood. The stars above seemed dimmer here, away from the manicured perfection of Oakwood. What she didn't know was that Matthew wasn't accepting her decision so easily, and that sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most unexpected opportunities. The next few days passed in a blur for Bethany. She threw herself into work, picking up extra shifts at both jobs, anything to keep her mind off Matthew and the pain in his eyes when she'd walked away. The record store's endless stream of love songs seemed to mock her, each melody a reminder of what she'd given up. At home, her mother noticed the change in her. "Sweetheart," she said one evening, finding Bethany sorting through old photographs in her room. "Want to tell me what's wrong?" Bethany looked up at her mother, noting the tired lines around her eyes, the calluses on her fingers from endless hours of sewing. "How do you do it, Mom? How do you keep going when everything seems so unfair?" Her mother sat on the bed, picking up one of the photographs, a faded image of their family in better times, before the factory started cutting wages. "Life isn't always fair, But that doesn't mean we stop living it. Sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that prove who we really are. At Oakwood, Matthew was waging his own quiet rebellion. He stopped attending family dinners, refused to discuss prep school plans, and spent hours in the club's photography room, developing the pictures he and Bethany had taken that night at the lake. "Your father and I are at our wits' end," Pamela complained to her friend Regina over tennis. "Well, he barely speaks to us anymore." "Boys that age are difficult," Regina sympathized, adjusting her tennis bracelet. "Remember that summer I caught my Thomas sneaking around with one of the lifeguards? Sometimes they need to learn the hard way." But Matthew wasn't just being difficult, he was making plans. In his room, college brochures were hidden under his mattress, not just Yale, but state schools with strong photography programs. He'd been researching scholarships, work-study programs, anything that could offer an alternative to the future his parents had mapped out. One afternoon, while sorting through returns at the record store, Bethany found a note slipped inside an album cover. She recognized Matthew's handwriting immediately. "Meet me at our place. Please, I need to tell you something important." She shouldn't go. She knew that. But as the sun began to set, her feet carried her toward Oakwood anyway. The maintenance road was quiet, the golf course empty. The groundskeeper's shed stood dark against the twilight sky. Matthew was already there, pacing nervously. When he saw her, his face lit up with relief. "You came." "I shouldn't have," Bethany said, but didn't turn away. "I've been thinking," Matthew began, running a hand through his hair. "Ask about what you said, about choosing my own path. You were right, but not in the way you thought." He pulled something from his back pocket, a thick envelope. "I applied to State University. Their photography program is one of the best in the country. And—" He paused and taking a deep breath. "I got in." Bethany stared at him. "But what about Yale? Your family?" "I don't want their future," Matthew said firmly. "I want my own. I've been working with the club's photographer, learning everything I can. He thinks I have real talent. There's a work-study program and student loans." "Matthew," Bethany interrupted, her heart aching. "You can't throw away everything for me." "I'm not—" He stepped closer, his eyes intense. "I'm doing this for me. You showed me that it's possible to follow your dreams, even when everything seems stacked against you. You work 2 jobs, help your mum, and still find time to capture beautiful moments with that old Polaroid. You're the bravest person I know." Before Bethany could respond, a voice cut through the gathering darkness. "I thought I might find you here." They turned to see Charles Oliver emerging from the shadows, his expression unreadable. Matthew instinctively stepped in front of Bethany, but his father waved him off. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Charles said, looking suddenly tired. "I've been watching you, Matthew. Both of you, actually, and I've been doing some thinking of my own." He pulled out his own envelope. "I found these in your room. Photography programs, scholarship applications, student loan papers. You were really ready to give up everything, weren't you?" Matthew stood straighter. "Yes, I was. I am." Charles was quiet for a moment, looking out over the darkening golf course. "You remind me of someone," he said finally. "A young man who wanted to be an architect, but his father insisted he go into banking instead." He smiled wryly. "I've spent years building this life, this legacy, convinced I was doing what was best for you. But maybe I was just repeating my father's mistakes." "Dad!" Matthew's voice held a note of uncertainty. "I had a long talk with the club's photographer," Charles continued. "He showed me your work. You have a real eye, son, a real talent, and more importantly, you have passion. That's something money can't buy." He handed the envelope to Matthew. "These are the forms for State University's photography program. I took the liberty of filling out the financial aid sections. You'll have to work hard, harder than you've ever worked in your life. But if this is really what you want—" Matthew opened the envelope with trembling hands. "But what about Yale? The family business?" "The family business will still be here if you change your mind. But for now—" Charles looked at Bethany, then back at his son. "For now, I think it's time for you to find your own path." Bethany felt tears welling up in her eyes. "Mr. Oliver, I never meant to cause problems in your family." "You didn't," Charles said softly. "You helped my son find his voice. That's not a problem, that's a gift." He straightened his tie, composing himself. "Now, I believe we have some things to discuss with your mother, Matthew, and perhaps we should invite Bethany's family to dinner. A proper dinner this time." As Charles walked back toward the clubhouse, Matthew turned to Bethany, his eyes shining with hope. "Does this mean—" "It means we have a chance," Bethany said, her own heart filling with cautious joy. "A real chance." But as they followed Charles back to the club, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the clubhouse window, Pamela Oliver, her expression a mix of fury and determination. She wasn't done fighting yet, not by a long shot. The Thompsons' modest living room felt crowded with the Olivers seated on their worn sofa. Bethany's mother had spent hours cleaning, apologizing for things that didn't need apologies, while her father sat stiffly in his chair, still in his factory uniform because he hadn't had time to change. Charles Oliver, however, seemed perfectly at ease, complimenting Mrs. Thompson's handmade curtains and asking Mr. Thompson thoughtful questions about his work. Only Pamela appeared uncomfortable, perched on the edge of the sofa as if afraid to touch it, her designer dress a stark contrast to the humble surroundings. "Your daughter has quite an impact on people," Charles was saying, accepting a cup of coffee from Mrs. Thompson. "The club's photographer can't stop talking about her eye for composition." Bethany's mother beamed with pride. "She's always been creative. Even as a little girl, she was always finding beauty in the smallest things. That's what drew me to her," Matthew added, earning a sharp look from his mother. "Well," Pamela cut in, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "creativity is all very well, but one can't build a future on pretty pictures, can one?" The room grew uncomfortably quiet. Bethany felt her face flush, but before she could respond, her father cleared his throat. "Actually, Mrs. Oliver, I disagree." All eyes turned to him. "I've worked in that factory for years, doing what was practical, what put food on the table, but every day I watch my daughter chase her dreams while working twice as hard as anyone I know. That's worth more than any guaranteed future." Pamela's perfectly painted lips thinned into a line. "How quaint. But surely you understand that Matthew has certain obligations, certain expectations." "That's enough, Pamela." Charles's voice was quiet, but firm. "We've discussed this." "Have we?" Pamela stood abruptly. "Have we really discussed throwing away generations of family tradition? Yale, the business, everything we've built." "Mom, please," Matthew started, but Pamela was already reaching into her handbag. "I tried to handle this quietly," she said, pulling out a thick envelope. "I tried to be reasonable, but since none of you will listen to reason—" She thrust the envelope at Bethany. "Open it." With trembling fingers, Bethany opened the envelope. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Her heart sank as she realized what they were. "I had you followed," Pamela announced, satisfaction creeping into her voice. "Every late-night meeting, every secret rendezvous. What would the club members say if they knew their precious facilities were being used for clandestine romance? What would your photography program say about trespassing?" "That's enough," Charles thundered, standing. "What were you thinking?" "I was thinking of our son's future, of our family's reputation." "No," Matthew said, his voice stronger than Bethany had ever heard it. "You were thinking of yourself, of your image, your reputation." He took the photographs from Bethany's hands and walked to the fireplace. "What are you doing?" Pamela demanded, as Matthew struck a match. "Choosing my own future." He dropped the burning match onto the photographs, watching as they curled and blackened in the flames. "You can't do this," Pamela whispered, all pretense of composure gone. "Actually, he can." Charles moved to stand beside his son. "Oh, and if you try to interfere again, Pamela, you'll find yourself excluded from more than just his choice of career." The threat hung in the air. Pamela looked around the room, finding no allies. Even the Thompsons, who had every reason to be intimidated by her wealth and status, met her gaze steadily. "Well," she said finally, smoothing her dress, "I can see I'm outnumbered. If you'll excuse me, I believe I've had quite enough. Hospitality for one evening." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Don't expect me to pick up the pieces when this all falls apart." After she left, the room remained silent for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, Charles chuckled. "I apologize for my wife," he said to the Thompsons. "She's not used to not getting her way. Now, shall we discuss more pleasant matters, like, perhaps, how we can help these two young people pursue their dreams?" The conversation that followed was unlike anything Bethany could have imagined a few weeks ago. Charles and her father discovered a shared interest in classic cars. Her mother and Charles engaged in a lengthy discussion about the business potential of her seamstress work, with Charles offering to introduce her to some of his more fashion-conscious business associates. As the adults talked, Matthew pulled Bethany aside to the small back porch. The night air was warm, filled with the sound of crickets and distant traffic. "I'm sorry about my mother," he said softly. "Don't be. You can't control what she does." "No, but I can control what I do." He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I meant what I said in there. I'm choosing my own future, and I want you to be part of it." Bethany looked up at him, seeing the determination in his eyes. "It won't be easy. Your mother won't give up, and there will be people who think like she does. Let them think what they want. We'll prove them wrong together." Inside, they could hear their fathers laughing about something, while Charles was apparently sketching out business plans with Mrs. Thompson. Two worlds, so different yet finding common ground. But in the shadows across the street, Pamela Oliver sat in her luxury car, watching the warm light spill from the Thompsons' windows. Her manicured fingers drummed against the steering wheel as she made a phone call. "It's me," she said into the car phone. "I need you to do some digging. Find out everything you can about the Thompsons. Everyone has secrets, and I intend to find theirs." The summer night suddenly felt a little colder, the crickets a little quieter. The peace that had been won might be more fragile than anyone realized. The summer was drawing to a close, and change hung in the air like the first hint of autumn. Bethany had given notice at both her jobs, preparing to start classes at the local community college, while continuing to help with her mother's now thriving seamstress business. Charles's connections had brought in a steady stream of wealthy clients, transforming their living room into a modest but busy workshop. Matthew spent his days between the club's photography studio and the Thompson house, where he was learning to see beauty in the simplest moments. The way sunlight caught in Bethany's hair as she sorted through fabric swatches, the quiet dignity in her father's weathered hands, the love in her mother's tired smile. But while their world seemed to be falling into place, Pamela Oliver was meticulously pulling at threads, searching for the one that would unravel everything. Mrs. Oliver, her private investigator, sat across from her in her study at Oakwood. "I found something interesting in the Thompson family history." Pamela's perfectly manicured fingers closed around the file he offered. As she read, a cold smile spread across her face. "Oh, this is perfect. Simply perfect." Later that afternoon, Bethany was helping her mother with a rush alteration when there was a knock at the door. Opening it, she found Pamela standing there, looking impossibly elegant despite the summer heat. "Is your mother home, dear? We need to have a chat." Before Bethany could respond, her mother appeared behind her, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mrs. Oliver, is something wrong with the Madison wedding dress?" "Oh, no, nothing like that." Pamela's smile was razor-sharp. "May I come in? What I have to discuss is rather personal." Mrs. Thompson hesitated, then nodded. "Bethany, would you mind giving us a moment?" Bethany retreated to her room, but left the door cracked open slightly. Something about Pamela's expression made her uneasy. "I've been doing some research," she heard Pamela say, "about your family, specifically about your time in Cedar Grove." There was a sharp intake of breath from Mrs. Thompson. That was a long time ago." "Not so long. Tell me, does your husband know about Thomas?" "How dare you?" Mrs. Thompson's voice shook. "That's none of your business." "Oh, but it is. You see, my son thinks he's in love with your daughter, and I need to protect him from, well, from people who aren't what they seem." Bethany's heart pounded. Who was Thomas? What was her mother hiding? "What do you want?" Mrs. Thompson asked quietly. It's simple, really. Convince your daughter to end things with Matthew. Tell her he deserves someone from his own world. Make her believe it's her choice. And if I don't, then everyone, including your husband, learns about Thomas, about why you really left Cedar Grove, about the money that disappeared. You don't understand, Mrs. Thompson pleaded. I was young, desperate. Thomas promised to help me escape my father's debts. He said he loved me. And then he disappeared with your father's money, leaving you to face the consequences. How tragic. Pamela's voice dripped with false sympathy. I wonder what your husband would think, knowing he wasn't your first choice, knowing you only married him after Thomas abandoned you. Stop it. The words came from Bethany, who couldn't stay hidden any longer. She emerged from her room, facing Pamela with steady eyes. I just stop. Bethany, no, her mother started, but Bethany cut her off. I heard everything. And you know what, Mrs. Oliver? You've just proved something I've suspected all along. You don't understand love at all. Pamela's composure slipped slightly. Excuse me. My mother's past doesn't change who she is now. It doesn't change the love she and my father share or the life they've built together. Just like your money and status don't make you a better person than us. You insolent... No, you listen. Bethany's voice grew stronger. You think you can control everyone with money and threats, but you can't. You can't control Matthew. You can't control who he loves. And you can't destroy my family with secrets from the past. Mrs. Thompson stood, moving to stand beside her daughter. Bethany's right. Tell whoever you want about Thomas. My husband knows everything already. I told him before we married about Thomas, about the money, about all of it, because that's what love is. Truth, acceptance, forgiveness. Pamela stared at them, her carefully constructed plan crumbling. You're bluffing. Ask him yourself. Mr. Thompson's voice came from the doorway. He'd come home early from his shift, still in his work clothes. I've known about Thomas since before I proposed. Mary told me everything. And you know what? It didn't matter because I loved her, still love her for who she is, not who she was. He moved to stand with his wife and daughter, a united front against Pamela's schemes. Now, I think it's time for you to leave our home. Pamela looked at each of them in turn, searching for a weakness, a crack in their solidarity. Finding none, she gathered her dignity around her like a shield. Well, she said, rising, so I can see I've wasted my time here, but don't think this is over. It is over, Mom. Matthew stood in the doorway, camera in hand. He'd captured everything, his mother's threats, Bethany's defense of her family, the Thompsons' unity. I heard everything, he said quietly. And if you ever try something like this again, these photos go to the club board. How do you think they'd feel about one of their members trying to blackmail a local business owner? Pamela's face went white. The club's social hierarchy was the foundation of her world. A scandal like this would destroy everything she'd built. You wouldn't dare. Try me. Matthew's voice was steel. I'm done letting you manipulate everyone around you. It's time for you to accept that I'm choosing my own path and the people I want to share it with. Pamela looked around the room one last time, then turned and walked out without another word. The sound of her car starting and driving away seemed to release a tension none of them had realized they were holding. Mrs. Thompson sank into a chair, trembling slightly. I'm so sorry, Bethany. I never wanted you to find out about Thomas like this. Mom, Bethany knelt beside her chair. You don't have anything to be sorry for. Your past made you who you are, the strongest, most loving person I know. Mr. Thompson placed a hand on his wife's shoulder. And who you are is someone I fall in love with more every day. Matthew watched the family embrace, feeling both like an intruder and somehow, impossibly, like he belonged. Bethany looked up and met his eyes, extending her hand to include him in their circle. But outside, in her car, Pamela Oliver wasn't driving home. Her hands gripped the steering wheel as she headed toward the one person who might still be able to help her stop this, her husband. Charles might think he was doing what was best for Matthew, but she was certain she could make him see reason. After all, she had secrets about him too. The summer sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, but the warmth of the evening couldn't touch the cold determination in Pamela's heart. She had one last card to play, and she intended to use it. The late summer storm that swept through town seemed to mirror the tension building at the Oliver mansion. Lightning illuminated the study where Charles sat behind his desk, watching his wife pace across the imported carpet. "You don't understand what you're risking," Pamela insisted, her voice tight with desperation. "I know about the Jensen deal, Charles, about what really happened with those contracts." Charles looked at his wife of many years, seeing her clearly perhaps for the first time. "Are you actually threatening me, Pamela? I'm trying to save this family, our reputation, our legacy." "No," Charles interrupted, standing slowly. "You're trying to save your idea of what this family should be. But I've realized something. Watching Matthew these past few weeks, seeing him with Bethany, observing how the Thompsons support each other. We've been wrong about so many things." "The Jensen deal was a mistake," Charles finished. "One I've regretted for years. And if exposing it is the price I have to pay to give our son a chance at real happiness, then so be it." Pamela stared at her husband, her carefully maintained facade cracking. "You can't mean that." "I do. In fact—" Charles reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a thick folder. "I've already contacted the board. Full disclosure, complete transparency. They're reviewing everything now." "You'll lose everything." "No, Pamela. I'll lose money, maybe status, but I might finally gain something worth having, my son's respect. And maybe, if I'm lucky, a chance to learn what the Thompsons already know about real family values." The door opened, revealing Matthew with his camera bag slung over his shoulder. "Dad, are you ready?" Charles nodded, gathering his coat. "Where are you going?" Pamela demanded. "To the Thompsons' house," Matthew answered. "They're hosting a small gathering to celebrate Bethany's acceptance into the photography program at State. Her scholarship came through." "Scholarship?" Pamela's laugh was brittle. "So now we're celebrating mediocrity." "We're celebrating hard work, determination and talent," Charles corrected. "You should come, Pamela. You might learn something." But Pamela remained frozen in place as her husband and son left, the sound of their footsteps echoing through the massive house. She moved to the window, watching their car disappear down the curved driveway, feeling her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. At the Thompson house, the atmosphere couldn't have been more different. The modest living room was filled with warmth and laughter. Mrs. Thompson's clients had spread the word about her talent, and evidence of her success was everywhere. Fabric samples, design sketches, and a new sewing machine gifted by grateful customers. Bethany was showing her latest photographs to the club's photographer, who had become a mentor to both her and Matthew. "Your composition is getting stronger," he noted, pointing to a particularly striking image. "You have a gift for capturing moments of genuine connection." The photograph in question showed Matthew's father teaching her father how to play golf in the Thompsons' small backyard, both men laughing as Charles demonstrated the proper grip on a borrowed club. It was a moment that would have seemed impossible just months ago. The doorbell rang, and Bethany opened it to find Matthew and Charles, but also, surprisingly, Pamela. She stood slightly apart from her husband and son, looking uncertain and out of place. May I come in?" she asked quietly. Bethany looked at Matthew, who nodded slightly. "Of course," she said, stepping aside. Pamela entered the warm, crowded room, taking in the scene. Mrs. Thompson was explaining a design concept to one of her high society clients, who was listening with genuine interest. Mr. Thompson and Charles were discussing plans to restore an old car they'd found. The club's photographer was showing Matthew's latest work to a small gallery owner who'd been invited. It was a gathering that crossed all social boundaries, where genuine connections had formed despite or perhaps because of their differences. "Mrs. Oliver," Mrs. Thompson approached, carrying a cup of coffee. "Would you like to join us?" "I was just about to show everyone Bethany's acceptance letter." Pamela accepted the cup with slightly trembling hands. "I don't know if I should—" "Everyone deserves a second chance," Bethany said softly. "That's something my mum taught me." Pamela looked at the young woman who had changed her son's life, and by extension, her entire family's future. She saw not the social climbing threat she'd imagined, but someone who genuinely loved her son for who he was, not what he represented. "I've been foolish," Pamela admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "And cruel. I don't deserve your kindness." "Maybe not," Mrs. Thompson agreed. "But kindness isn't about deserving. It's about choosing to be better than our worst moments." As if to underscore her words, a burst of laughter drew their attention. Matthew was showing his father how to use his camera, while Mr. Thompson posed ridiculously with a golf club, making everyone smile. "They look happy," Pamela observed, something like wonder in her voice. "They are happy," Bethany confirmed, "not because of money or status or what other people think, just because they're free to be themselves." Pamela was quiet for a long moment, watching her husband and son interact with genuine joy. Finally, she turned to Bethany. "To the photography program at State. It's quite competitive, isn't it?" "Very," Bethany nodded. "Then perhaps I could help. I know several gallery owners who might be interested in mentoring a promising young photographer. 2 promising young photographers, actually." The offer hung in the air, tentative but sincere. Bethany smiled. "That would be wonderful, Mrs. Oliver. Would you like to see some of our work?" As Pamela followed Bethany to where the photographs were displayed, something shifted in the room, a final barrier breaking down, a last piece falling into place. Later that evening, as the gathering wound down, Matthew found Bethany in the backyard. The storm had passed, leaving the air fresh and clean. Stars peeked through breaking clouds, and somewhere in the distance music played. Another love song from the radio, but this time it didn't hurt to hear it. "What are you thinking about?" Matthew asked, slipping his arm around her waist. "About how sometimes the most beautiful pictures come from the most unexpected moments," Bethany replied, leaning into him, "like a wrong turn that leads you somewhere amazing." "Or sneaking into a country club," she laughed. "And or that." Inside, their families continued to mingle, barriers of class and privilege forgotten in the warmth of genuine connection. Charles was examining Mrs. Thompson's business plans with genuine interest, while Pamela was surprisingly engaged in conversation with the gallery owner about emerging photographers. "You know," Matthew said softly, "we never did get that dance at the gala." "Here, now." Bethany looked around the modest backyard. "Why not? The stars are out. There's music in the air." He held out his hand with an exaggerated bow. "May I have this dance, Miss Thompson?" Bethany took his hand, and as they swayed together under the summer stars, she realized something profound. Love wasn't about fitting into someone else's world or changing who you were. It was about creating your own world together, one genuine moment at a time. From the kitchen window, both families watched the young couple dance, each adult reflecting on their own journey to this moment. Pamela slipped her hand into Charles's, perhaps for the first time in years, remembering why they'd fallen in love in the first place. Mrs. Thompson leaned against her husband, grateful for second chances and the wisdom they brought. And the club's photographer quietly captured one last image, 2 young people dancing in a backyard, their love transforming an ordinary moment into something extraordinary. The summer was ending, but their story was just beginning. There would be challenges ahead, college classes, career decisions, and the ongoing adventure of bridging 2 different worlds. But they had learned the most important lesson, that love, real love, doesn't erase differences. It celebrates them, grows from them, and builds something entirely new from them. And sometimes the most beautiful things in life come not from grand gestures or perfect plans, but from the courage to let your heart lead you down unexpected paths into a future bright with possibility. Thank you for watching today's story. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel to relive the magic of the 80s every day with our heartfelt stories. May God bless you and your family, and don't forget to click on the video popping up on the screen right now. It's another totally rad story you won't want to miss. See you in the next video, and stay awesome.